Welcome to All About Bitcoin, a show dedicated to all things, questions, and markets related to Bitcoin, little b for the currency, and Bitcoin, big B for the network. A collective journey to understand, apply, and use this innovation, all Bitcoin, all the time. I'm your host, GALEN Moore, filling in for Christine Lee all this week. Top stories in the Bitcoin news today. Needham and Company is rating Coinbase a buy. The investment bank initiated coverage of the publicly traded crypto exchange, setting a price target of $420. Coinbase's stock not getting a lift from the buy rating, however. It's trading at about $258 a share, up 0.5% on the day so far. Slightly better than the S&P 500 index, which is trading at a record high. BLOCKSTREAM, a software developer founded by early Bitcoin contributors, has raised $210 million in a round of financing that values the Canadian company at $3.2 billion. BLOCKSTREAM intends to use the funds to begin chip manufacturing for ASICs. The process is dedicated to mining cryptocurrency and to advance its renewables-focused mining service, announced earlier this month. UK investment manager Bailey Gifford and iFinex, the parent company of cryptocurrency exchange Bitfinex and stablecoin issuer Tether, were the only investors named. Fears about the potential negative impact of a new U.S. tax provision may be overblown. Industry watchers fear a loose definition of brokers in the provision attached to the U.S. infrastructure spending bill could envelop Bitcoin network miners and validators, stifling cryptocurrency innovation. Those fears are misplaced, one unnamed Treasury Department official told CNBC in a report out this morning, saying Treasury will stick to a more traditional definition of broker activities. We'll be watching as the bill and plans for its implementation move forward. Checking in on the Bitcoin price, the CoinDesk Bitcoin Price Index, the XBX, has given back a little more ground and is at about 48,200 this afternoon. That's still comfortably up about 16% over where it started the month of August, which was around 41,475, but down some 2.7%, 2.4% rather, from where it was this time on Monday, 3 p.m. New York. That being, of course, the time when all crypto traders take a break to devote their full attention to All About Bitcoin.
The chart of the day is brought to you by Crypto.com, the world's fastest growing crypto app.
Time for the chart of the day. Today's chart of the day is pulled from the peer-to-peer crypto markets. As many of you watching know, most Bitcoin is traded on exchanges with central order books, but some is traded peer-to-peer. Much like a purchase that might take place over Craigslist as opposed to one over Amazon. As you can see from this chart, smaller markets outside the US and China are growing faster in crypto trading activity by this measure relative to what can be seen in the largest crypto markets. Keeping in mind these are growth indexes, not absolute figures. And with us today to talk about what this all means is Kim Grauer, Director of Research at blockchain forensics firm Chainanalysis. Welcome, Kim.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So Kim, the chart we were just looking at comes from Chainanalysis's annual report on Bitcoin adoption by country worldwide. What metrics were used in the study to measure adoption?
Well, the Global Cryptocurrency Adoption Index is something that we put out every year, and its goal is to quantify adoption. Now, what does that mean and how do you quantify adoption? There's a lot of different ways you can do that. Surveys, asking people through surveys and looking at the amount of traded volume. And what we do at Chainanalysis is we track on-chain data. So we looked at the amount of the total value received at the country level, the retail market, and the peer-to-peer market. And we combine those together to create an index. And then we introduce weights for important reasons. That if we didn't introduce weights, the index would look very different. And then we simply see how the countries performed based on this data.
So without that weighting for factors, I assume like GDP, for example, how would these countries that are at the top of the list, and I don't know, maybe we can get the table up on the screen here actually. Vietnam was at the top of the list this year. How does a country like that stack up against, say, the US or China when it comes to these measurements?
If we didn't introduce weights, the everything would look very different. We'd see the United States and China at the very top, just because these countries have the most wealth and the biggest populations. And I don't know exactly where Vietnam would stack up, but I do know that we introduced these weights in order to account for different wealth and population sizes for different countries, and it allows countries to pop out because of their it allows us to compare countries that have different circumstances in a better way.
So let's talk about that a little bit, specifically on some of the countries that are popping out here. What do you think are the factors motivating adoption in countries like Vietnam and India, which topped the ranking? What's going on the ground there?
I think that the first thing to say is when we do this research, one of the first things that we find is that no two countries are alike, and there are completely different socioeconomic and political factors that are actually impacting the adoption for every single different country. I oftentimes at the end of this report, I feel like someone should do a dissertation on crypto adoption for every single country. That being said, what we noticed, what was going on in Vietnam, was a really robust crypto adoption environment. And what we heard when we showed local experts this data, we heard that, hey, this makes sense. We are seeing there's a tech-savvy young population. There isn't kind of a traditional ETF that you can invest your wealth in. And there's also kind of a culture of gambling and speculation. And so we heard about maybe people even sometimes putting their houses up in order to get money to gamble. And so all of these things together have made cryptocurrency in Vietnam really grow this year. But then if you look at India, go ahead.
I would just note that it's a score of 1 for Vietnam to the runner-up India's 0.37. That's quite a gap.
Yeah, so India was the second one, and the reason why India is actually doing so well on the index is different from Vietnam. So India, we learned a lot about a lot of high net wealth individuals, institutions, and one thing to note about that gap between the one and the next number is because of the way we calculate the index. It's an average across all of these different metrics. Vietnam performed well across all of the metrics, but if you look at India did well on the retail market and the received market, but didn't have a very strong peer-to-peer market. So it was below 100 or something, and that kind of does reflect the high net worth institutional crypto environment in India that we saw that's not being carried out on the peer-to-peer marketplaces. And so it's not so much that Vietnam has so much more adoption. It's just performing strongly on the retail and the received and the peer-to-peer marketplace. Whereas India, really robust market, strong retail, strong received, but doesn't have that peer-to-peer presence.
Got it. So let's talk a little bit about that peer-to-peer piece. And just to maybe clarify a little bit, if I can, I think when you say received, you're talking about an estimate of how much was, say, Bitcoin was received as measured in blockchain-based transactions. Is that right?
Yeah, so it's to be distinguished from order book data.
Right.
So we're looking at blockchain settled transactions that we estimate were received by all of these different countries.
You're seeing these on the network and sort of applying some heuristics to judge which country that those funds are going to. So then looking at peer-to-peer exchange volume, I want to look at that metric specifically. Usefultulips.org, which I'm sure you're familiar with, has the volume on peer-to-peer exchanges in aggregate at about $80 million in July. That's on the two largest platforms, which are Local Bitcoins and Paxful combined. So, that's about 2,000 Bitcoin. Over the same period, some 372,000 Bitcoin moved on the Coinbase Bitcoin dollar market alone, according to CoinDesk Index's data. So peer-to-peer is small relative to the crypto markets at large. Why should we be looking at such a small sliver of economic activity in cryptocurrency as an indicator of adoption?
Yeah, so I'm very familiar with Useful Tulips. It's Matt Alberg's website, and he's done a lot of really pioneering work on the role of peer-to-peer marketplaces in some developing markets. So I highly encourage people to go check out his blogs. He's been a really great resource for us at Chainanalysis. And why do we look at peer-to-peer when it's so small? Well, the thing about peer-to-peer marketplaces is that they actually serve markets where there's not these centralized exchanges, where centralized exchanges actually haven't been able to move into these marketplaces, like for banking reasons. Maybe there's a highly restrictive government. So the peer-to-peer marketplaces actually tend to better quantify grassroots adoption in places where they don't have the alternative to do so. So if we were to not look at peer-to-peer marketplaces, we would be missing out such an important part of this picture, which is smaller, you're right. But when we wait for all of these things, we're not really interested in where are the hundreds of millions of dollars coming from and going to. We're really interested in where is relative, we talked about this at the top of the call, relative to a country's wealth and population, internet using population, where is the most cryptocurrency adoption happening? And peer-to-peer marketplaces, because of the fact that exchanges aren't operating in many countries, are a really important part of this picture.
So would you think, for those of us who may be interested in where the hundreds of millions of dollars are coming and going, could these be taken as leading indicators where you might look to the maturation of that market in the future and more significant volume there?
I've definitely left doing this report feeling extremely optimistic about cryptocurrency and adoption worldwide, and really feeling like we're really at the start of something. And in terms of if it's a leading indicator or a lagging indicator, I don't know exactly, but I do have a strong sense after talking to people and looking at how things have really grown. We created a global adoption chart. And if you weight all activity and just look at the amount, if you look at our index, just tracing global adoption over time, it's just skyrocketed, especially over the past year. And so I think that trend is really going to continue over the next year. And there are other metrics you can look to if you want to isolate the $100 million, which exchanges are those mostly going to. But this is indicative of a future trend in the sense that we are seeing activity in every country and it's growing.
So I think we have time maybe for one more question. I want to actually get a little bit specific on some of the use cases you're identifying here. We talked about speculation in Vietnam, and the report specifically mentions sort of a store of value scenario in countries where high inflation or currency crises are taking place. Ukraine was one of the top countries for adoption, where inflation is in the double digits. But you also mentioned in the report remittances and business transactions. So can you talk specifically about the growth of those uses for cryptocurrency? How do you measure them, and what evidence is there that cryptocurrency is finding adoption in those areas?
So let's take remittances. Just to refresh our methodology, I wish that we could ask every single person behind every single transfer, why did you do that? So let's say we've isolated a transaction from a US-based exchange to a Mexico-based exchange, and it's going between deposit addresses once a month, and it's $50. That's all we're going to see. So I can't ask the person who initiated the transfer, hey, were you doing a remittance? So we are restricted by the assumptions that we have to make about the data. And so when we estimate remittances, we're looking at smaller transfers coming into traditional remittances corridors, Vietnam, Nigeria, Mexico, and between Venezuela and Colombia. And then we'll supplement that with conversations of businesses on the ground. So in Nigeria, we talk to a lot of businesses who are they do remittances. They figured out that the Forex market in Nigeria is not accessible to most people. There's a business on the rails of cryptocurrency where you can connect your friends and your friends of friends and help facilitate cryptocurrency payments across international borders. And we heard about that between Venezuela and Colombia. We heard about that in Mexico, and we know that it's happening in Vietnam. So we're supplementing. Yeah.
You're combining a sort of a anecdote with data to form a heuristic there, I guess, if I can sum that up.
And then the same is true with business, where we heard about people importing goods from China using cryptocurrency. A lot of it has to do with capital controls. What are the capital controls of your country, and what are the foreign exchange requirements necessary if you want to actually participate in those international conversions? But for the most part, it's data in combination with what types of businesses are there more. When it comes to businesses, we actually track merchant service activity. And so we've seen it steadily grow over time. So we've seen e-commerce with cryptocurrency growing as well.
Great. Kim, I think that's all we have time for, but I want to thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much.
That was Kim Grauer, Director of Research at Chainanalysis. And that's it for All About Bitcoin. I'm Galen Moore. Join us tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. in New York for First Mover, your first look at the day's global crypto news headlines. You're watching CoinDesk TV.